In a Soviet system, everything comes back to this unfalsifiable logic of whatever we say has to be true and right. Shut up. There's no actual persuasion. There's no facts, logic, anything else. It's shut up. The revolution is all that you need to know. And there's a very similar mindset with the diversity, equity, and inclusion crowd, where it's effectively it's a secular religious belief that is unfalsifiable, the answer to all things. And even when it falls into self-contradiction, it is still the only answer that is acceptable. Just like with the Soviets when they were asked, oh, well, if our system is so much better, why do the factories produce so much less? That's counter-revolutionary rhetoric. You must be an enemy of the state. In our case, it's, if our system is so racist, why do so many immigrants do so well and want to come here? Sounds like you're an enemy of the state, Clay. Sounds kind of racist.
We had Nikki Haley on the show Friday, I believe. The week she announced she's now officially running for president of the United States. Buck, you missed our good friend Don Lemon saying that Nikki Haley was past her prime because she was not in her 20s, 30s, or 40s, which was, frankly, ridiculous and funny. And now Don Lemon is going to have to enter into a form of training. I don't know what that was not explained what sensitivity training Don Lemon is going to have to enter. Although I would love to watch Don Lemon having to take sensitivity training. I mean, that would actually probably be a higher rated show than the morning show that he's currently on, which is Laundering for CNN. But it was part and parcel of a pretty direct and consistent attack on Nikki Haley. But I thought MSNBC was actually the worst because they essentially reran the LA Times headline of Larry Elder, who was the blackface of white supremacy, if you remember that LA Times sterling article. Here was Nikki Haley getting attacked for being a brown face in a white supremacist body or something. Listen.
For white supremacists and racists, she's the perfect Manchurian candidate. And instead of applauding her, I am just disgusted by people like Nikki Haley who know better, whose parents were the beneficiaries, as Asha said, of the 1965 Immigration Nationality Act, which passed thanks to those original BLM protesters and the Civil Rights Act. Her father came here because he was a professor. He taught at a historically black college in South Carolina. That's how she became the proud American that she is. And yet, what does she do? Like all these model minorities, which, by the way, is the strategy of white supremacy to use Asians in particular as a cudgel against black folks. Instead of pulling us up from the bootstraps and pulling others from the bootstrap, we're taught to take your boot and put it on the neck of poor browns, immigrants, refugees, and black folks. And that's what she did in her ad. So I see her and I feel sad, Mehdi, because she uses her brown skin as a weapon against poor black folks and poor brown folks, and she uses her brown skin to launder white supremacist talking points.
This person is a lunatic. Can we just? But this is mainstream thinking on the left now, that you can say things like this and that you can accuse non-white people who speak about merit, hard work, the meritocracy, the growth and growth possibilities and promise of America and land of opportunity, any of that stuff. And you can be accused by the left as a non-white person of speaking in favor of white supremacy. First of all, I mean, Nikki Haley is somebody who pulled down the Confederate flag, right? I mean, that when she was governor. Which by the way, there are some people there are people who argue about that whole thing, but I'm just saying, you would think that they would have to give one example, or they should at least give one example of in what way is she a white supremacist. Now, I'm not a big fan of Nikki Haley policies, but she's not a white supremacist, and it is abhorrent to say that. And to get away with it, but the left has created such a narrative on the issues. They used to use the term intersectionality, which really they've kind of dropped. Intersectionality is their view of the world, which is that all groups, all races, all genders are in a interlocking series of oppressive states with each other, or oppressive levels with each other. Some are more oppressed than others. Everybody's at some.
It's a pyramid of victimization. Yeah.
It's a pyramid of victimization. Intersectionality. They've stopped using that phrase because it didn't really catch on, but that really is how they see the world. And it does force a lot of us to sit here and say, why are they so spiteful, and why are their arguments so weak on the left?
It's racist to judge somebody based on the color of their skin. Democrats are racist, right? Like this argument circle that we're in right now, Buck, is a lot of the things that are said on the left now would have been talking points in 1950s America for racist, right? They've come full circle to readopt many of the same talking points, right? I mean, if you think about the idea of universities, for instance, as having segregated spaces where the races must be separated. We're kind of back to that separation of the races argument. It's crazy. Also, this ties in with the argument that we saw Thursday, I think it was, in the Georgia legislature of last week, that Clarence Thomas wasn't Uncle Tom, and that was why he could. That's literally what they said on the floor of the Georgia legislature, and therefore he didn't deserve to have a statue in the pantheon of heroes there in Georgia, despite the fact that he grew up in poverty and risen all the way to the Supreme Court. But two big points here that I think utterly refute the idea of America as a racist country. One, think about how many immigrants who are all, by and large, brown-skinned, right, percentage-wise, are willing to die to get here. That would seem like a really poor choice if you were going to a supremely racist country. Second, and I think this needs to be hammered home, I wish more Republican elected officials would discuss it. Do you know who the highest earning race and ethnicity is in the United States today?
I do.
Asian men.
Asian Americans.
Asian men are making about 50% more than white people. Asian women now have passed white men, I believe, on weekly earnings as well. That would seem to be a huge flaw in white supremacy if Asian, many of whom recently immigrated this country, can now make more money than white people.
Well, that's also, as you heard there from that commentator, why they say the model minority framework, which is used as a tool of white supremacy. This is fascinating. The white supremacist system of America that the left rails against elevates non-white individuals on such a massive level that they out-earn their white counterparts now nationwide in some categories. And that's all some big scheme. It's not because we actually just have a land of opportunity where if you work hard, stay married, go through school, get married, stay married, go through school. All the socioeconomic data you can show proves that there are a few things you can do. You will not be in poverty. You will be in the middle class, and you'll keep rising through the middle class. There is no refutation to this other than racism, racism. They scream racism all the time. And in this case now, they're screaming that there's a scheme. Who's behind the scheme, by the way? To use the model minority narrative to make it seem like there's actually opportunity in America when there isn't for all minorities. But see, this is just insane because, no, that is the model minority situation, as they call it, model minority, shows that, Nigerian Americans Nigerian immigrants to America out-earn the average American household. Is that also some scheme of the white supremacist right?
What's also funny, Buck, is if Nikki Haley had lost her race to be the Republican governor of South Carolina, they would have said she lost because Republicans wouldn't embrace a woman of Indian descent in that state because of racism and sexism, right? And so she wins, and then the argument becomes, well, she's just a cover for the racism and the... They're going to argue racism and sexism no matter what.
You know, when you go and read some of the great anti-Soviet writers and dissidents, so you go and read Solzhenitsyn, I think probably one of the most important authors of the 20th century, right up there with George Orwell and a number of others. But you read them, Clay, and one thing that comes across is that in a Soviet system, everything comes back to this unfalsifiable logic of whatever we say has to be true and right, shut up. There's no actual persuasion. There's no facts, logic, anything else. It's shut up. The revolution is all that you need to know. And there's a very similar mindset with the diversity, equity, and inclusion crowd, where it's effectively it's a secular religious belief that is unfalsifiable, the answer to all things. And even when it falls into self-contradiction, it is still the only answer that is acceptable. Just like with the Soviets when they were asked, oh, well, if our system is so much better, why do the factories produce so much less? That's counter-revolutionary rhetoric. You must be an enemy of the state. In our case, it's, if our system is so racist, why do so many immigrants do so well and want to come here? Sounds like you're an enemy of the state, Clay. Sounds kind of racist.